Hey folks, it's Perry again, and what I'm holding here is a wiring harness for the project truck, and I wanted to do an update on this and sort of get things rolling again, but let's talk about the status of this project. Where I left off, I had pulled the motor out, pulled the cam covers, and the cam was just was damaged. The left side driver's cam was damaged. There was two bad roller followers, and so I tore down the valve train, removed all the roller followers, and that's pretty much where I stopped. Last I talked, we were going to work on the wiring harness and build a whole new one from scratch. And that wasn't something I was really looking forward to doing. I had done all the work with the books and stuff like that, but it just wasn't sort of a fun task. So I bought this off of eBay. This is a harness for a 172-inch wheelbase truck, which is a pickup truck. This is a 165-inch wheelbase chassis cab, so there are some differences, but this harness was $60 and it's brand new. There's going to be a little bit of modification necessary to make this harness work on the project truck, but it's less than if I had taken the original diesel harness and overlaid the 07 gas harness onto that to make it all work. So why don't I show you this harness on the 07 chassis, and we'll just use that as a stand-in. I'll show you the differences and what's going to need to be addressed. So what I have here is the harness laid out on top of the chassis. I've used one of the mounting holes up here as a reference to sort of position it in reference to the engine. And right away there are some very obvious differences. The first one is, since this was designed for a crew cab instead of a standard cab, the part of the harness that crosses over is quite a bit further back. On the standard cab it would cross here, but on the crew cab it crosses about right here. So that's an issue we'll have to address. Where that crosses over has more to do with the ABS sensor on the right front wheel, since there's a fixed position in the frame where that sticks and everything else has to base off of that. So we have a couple of landmarks that we need to deal with. One of them is the two little holes next to the transmission where the harness goes, so that it's positioned in relation to the main engine compartment harness. And then we've got the ABS sensor over there, and then we have an ABS sensor for the rear axle here, and that would be this. So overall the harness is a bit longer, so I'm kind of leaning towards, now that I've had a chance to think about this, actually splitting the loom right here and then sort of moving where some of these wires are, where they exit the loom, and then taping that back up. And I'll bring you over and explain why I'm thinking about doing that, and some of the other changes between a wide frame pickup chassis and a narrow frame chassis cab chassis. So I'll bring you over here. So let's start with the fuel tank. There is no fuel tank right here. The pickup chassis has a mid-mount fuel tank, which is about right here on a pickup. But what we have on a chassis cab is a tray that contains all the evap stuff for the fuel system, as well as the fuel pump driver module, which is this. Now, there's also a couple of other changes with regard to the fuel tank. On a pickup, the fuel pump and the float are just a 4-pin connector here, and then that's your fuel tank pressure. Those just connect directly to the pump and the pressure switch, but on a chassis cab they terminate at an 8-pin round connector. So that is a significant difference, but it's not that big of a deal. And let me tell you why. So our fuel pump wires that talk to the fuel pump come out right here, but they need to come out back there. And our fuel pump driver module is here, but it actually needs to be back there because that is where it is on a pickup truck. Now, way back here, this connector is the fuel pump driver module, like on the very back end of the truck. This connector right here is just a bunch of wires that run through this loom and then go over to there. What I can do is I can either relocate this fuel pump driver module, or I can de-loom it and then bring it up and then put it in the correct spot, which will then give me some free space or some length for these wires to be reloomed. It all depends on how much I feel like making this pretty harness not look so pretty anymore. So the harness is very long in the back, so let me bring it around to show you some of the features. This harness is for a truck with a backup camera and parking aid. So this is the connector that goes to the harness that goes to the bumper for the parking aid, and this is the that's the fuel pump one. This is the tail light harness that includes extra wires for the backup camera. So I need either another harness or I need to cut this off and re-terminate it because this is a chassis cab and you don't have pickup taillights. One of the nice things about this harness though is that instead of having blunt cut wires, which is what a chassis cab has, it has the molded connector, so I could get a pickup box trailer connector and then plug it in there and have a separate sub harness in the event that I want to say take the bed off the truck. I have a place to disconnect it so that, you know, take the flatbed off, or if that gets damaged I can replace that as a sub assembly. So right away, you know, the numbers, this is a 165-inch wheelbase chassis, but the harness is for a 172-inch wheelbase chassis. The difference is 7 inches, but the length of this harness is considerably longer than this chassis. And I would assume that the pickup trucks had about the same overhang after the axle, but maybe they have more overhang, I don't know. But what I do know is that there's there's going to be some lengthening of wires for this, and since we have to change to a different connector anyway, because it just comes out of the tank like this, I'm probably just going to take the 07 wires and just feed those alongside into some convoluted tubing and then cut this off and just extend the fuel pump wires. Now for the fuel pump module, I'll probably do the same thing, extend that, and then the canister purge valve, which is way up there where the fuel tank would be on a pickup, the purge valve is way back here, sort of, I guess, where your spare tire would be on a pickup. So there's definitely some landmark changes between the the 172 wide frame and the 165 narrow frame chassis, but they're not insurmountable. In overall, it's less work than trying to make an overlay harness. And there's one other factor I hadn't divulged yet, and that is the 08 harness had been exposed to UV, and the convoluted tubing that went around the harness was crumbling, and there was bare wires or wires showing through the corrugated tubing, and so that would all have to be replaced anyway, which means I have to rewrap the entire harness, and that's just a lot of work. This cost me $60 on eBay, and it's brand new. So I think this is the route we're going to go. That's really sort of, that part. Let me set you up and I'll tell you what is left that we have to do on the truck. Now I got you set up on the inside of the frame rail here because there's this stainless steel tubing The bright stainless is the fuel. These are the fuel feed and return lines to the tank, and then this is the brake line. Now, these lines are not the same between a diesel and a gas vehicle. The gasoline does not have a return, but it has an evap tube, and it's like a 5/8 stainless tube for evap and then 3/8 for the fuel. So right away we have to change this, but the loom trees that are mounted to the frame right here are designed for the diesel fuel fuel lines instead of the gas. So what I'm going to need to do is I have to unbolt these from both the 07 donor and this truck, and then swap all of the fuel lines and everything, including the loom mounts from the 07 to this. Now the upshot is both of these are 165-inch wheelbase, which just happened to be a complete fluke. I didn't set out to buy the exact same wheelbase truck, but it was fortunate. The tanks are in the same place and should just swap out, and that should get me closer. Now let me explain a little bit more up front what we need to do. Tell me, what is the most obvious feature on the front end of this truck right now? It's the AC condenser. Now, why am I talking about the AC condenser? Well, the simple answer is these lines are on the bottom, and on a gas engine, they're on the top and the bottom. That means that the AC lines in their entirety are different between the gas and the diesel trucks. The routing is different, the condenser is different. Basically, the only thing that I think I can reuse is the compressor, because the compressor is an 08 compressor. I could be completely wrong, and the mounting hole patterns could be different. So far, the only thing that seems to be the same between the 07 and the 08 is the engine and the ECU for the most part, because in 08, I believe that only some of the vehicles, or it was an option to get the immobilizer. In 07, they didn't have an immobilizer. So sticking the 07 computer in here, I think, should work and not cause me any troubles. But everything else changes. And so all this has to come out. And that sort of brings me to the next part, which is the power steering pump. That's different too. The hose routing and the mounting pattern, or the way that pump mounts, is completely different between the gas and the diesel. So I got to rip the fuel lines out. I got to swap out the power steering pump and hope that the hose routing will work on the V10 with the hoses and the reservoir from the gas or from the diesel. So there's a lot of stuff that I didn't know going into this, and now I do know. And I've watched name escapes me at the moment, JC's Projects or something like that. He's got complete trucks to be able to just swap from one to the other, and it's just cookie cutter. It's just the labor, and obviously he's got the knowledge of having done that. I'm just kind of piecing together a truck from eBay because it was cheap. And so that sort of brings me to the last part of, what is this truck going to be? What am I going to do with this truck? That's a very good question. When I started this project, I needed a second truck, a backup vehicle as it were, for when my truck was down and out. And there have been, 3 times in 5 years that my truck has been unavailable due to some sort of mechanical issue. Most recently, it was the IPR valve failed. And I'm sorry, but Ford messed up on that. There's absolutely no diagnostic codes. You just got to kind of wing it and look at live data to figure it out. And it's extremely non-repeatable. But anyway, that truck, it's had its issues. not because it's unreliable, just because, you know, things. And so I got this truck, but then an opportunity to buy my dad's F-250 came up and I bought it. So I've got a 97 F-250 7.3 that was the backup truck I used when my truck wasn't working. And so now I've got both of those trucks, and I've got to maintain both of those trucks and insure both of those trucks. What am I going to do with this truck? Because once I get this thing running, I got to get the title issues sorted out, because I don't have a title. The title could be buried underneath the dash in all the, you know, rodent stuff, because I got to pull the dash apart anyway to get all that rodent stuff out from the firewall. I may well find the title, and that could solve my problem. But I got to deal with the title, and then it's got to get tires. And on the low end, I'm looking at like $2,400 in tires to $3,000 in tires. That puts this at basically a $5,000, $6,000 project. And there's registration and insurance issues associated with a 550 because it's considered a commercial vehicle. And if it becomes difficult for me to insure it on my personal policy and get it registered with a tree plate, then it's not really worth having to me, and I'll end up having to sell the truck. But the upshot of that is I'm doing everything right. The truck is going to be a gas truck, and that's perfectly legal in Oregon to convert a diesel to a gas as long as you retain all of the emissions stuff for the gas. So it will be a sellable truck. It'll just be a 6.4 diesel on the title with a 6.8 liter V10 and all the trimmings. So that's part of the reason why I haven't been super motivated to work on this in the last, you know, year, aside from the fact that I've had side projects, and, you know, it turned out to be a nickel and dimer. You know, you buy some parts and then you find you have to buy more parts and more parts. And when is it going to stop? So now I've got that wiring harness. I can get moving on that. I need to order the camshaft and lifters or the followers, and that's going to be $500. And I always knew it was going to be $500. So, you know, that's where we're at on this. I'm going to sign off here. This is the second time I did this today, because the first time my recorder didn't work and the audio was completely useless. So light is failing and it's getting cold. So I'll catch you later. Bye.